Different balls can maintain more spin in wet conditions. And is that important to you as a golfer or not? Do you want to maximize spin around the greens, or is your technique such that you like to control it with launch and you're okay with a little bit more rollout?
Yep.
And being able to have that level of nuance in educate a golfer through that selection process is also pretty fun.
So we were talking about one of your cool toys you have, which is Ballnamic. So can you explain to people what that is?
Yeah, Ballnamic is a way to find like what's the right golf ball for you. And choosing the right golf ball is can be a daunting experience, because it's hard to test them all, and it's hard to keep up with how they perform. They change a lot year over year. What you see with some of their initial conditions doesn't always tell the story of how they fly aerodynamically.
Downrange, right? That's where you're spending most of your time with the performance?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so a couple things you might have learned about that. What do you do, or what do you tell like the amateur who might be watching this? What do you do when there's a crosswind, left to right, right to left? How should most people be playing golf?
Yeah, I think for your amateur golfer, where you're not going to take that right to left wind and curve it into it, you got to know how much that crosswind is going to affect it. And for your amateur golfer, probably try to execute your stock shot. Now, as you become more elite in your skill, you can leverage the wind in a more advanced way, and we see that with our tour players. They curve it into the wind to take distance off, reduce their dispersion. So I think you want to kind of scale how you use the wind relative to your skill and your probability of pulling off that shot.
Yeah, who out of the Ping Tour players is the best at that?
Shaping the golf ball?
Yeah.
I think Corey Connors comes to mind, and he's also his strokes gained approach is really high. Yep. So he's good at leveraging the wind, curving it into wind, riding the wind, and using that to control his kind of land angle vector, how the ball's landing, as well as distance control.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite swingers too, so he's got a good hit.
Yeah, he's fun to watch.
He's good for sure. How about into the wind and downwind? I know you were mentioning a ton of different ways that you can play that.
Absolutely. I think we've looked at a few things using kind of the engine of Ballnamic to say, okay, if you're into the wind, what's the most important thing? Is it controlling spin, or is it controlling your peak height? Right. And it turns out our modeling has shown that controlling your peak height is the most important thing to do. So when you're practicing controlling your windows, so to speak, if you practice in most of the time controlling your peak height, that's going to give you that ability into the wind to be able to minimize the impact on the wind.
You suggesting bringing it down at all, or just manage it to whatever your typical shot? Bringing
it down. So into the wind, if you're into the wind, you want to kind of reduce the impact of the wind on both your dispersion, because the wind's can be gusting a little bit, as well as the total impact of the wind on your distance. It would be bringing it down.
Yeah. And how about setting expectations for a lot of people, like amateur golfers on average? Not everybody who watches these videos, they're obviously very well educated. They don't really know what they do. They don't always know what to do, and they certainly don't know how to do it. That's why we have GOLFTEC as a business and teaching people how to do, measuring your swings so that you know what you do, and then explaining the rest of the game to you.
Yeah.
That's what a professional coach does. I think most people don't have the right expectation into the wind of what the end result is going to be. So comparatively to no wind, normal day, dogs barking, you've got sunscreen on, you're outside hitting your normal shot, versus what happens when you're into the wind. So what should people expect as differences, especially off the tee?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's say you're hitting an iron shot. Let's say your average golfer's hitting a 7-iron into the wind, 10 miles an hour. They could lose like 15 yards if they don't change their trajectory. Now, if they change that trajectory, they might only lose 8 or 10 yards. So again, that kind of depends on how much you control that peak height. Now, into the wind is going to affect you more than downwind. For some players, it's a 2-to-1 ratio, but not everybody. Okay. So maybe you're hurt 15 yards into the wind. That helping wind then might help you 10 yards. So for most players, it's kind of closer to that ratio of, the helping wind's not going to help you as much as the hurting wind's going to hurt you.
Right.
And I think that's an important thing as a general rule, and then we can get a lot more specific on the exact numbers.
So that's the shot depth. What about the dispersion, left and right?
Dispersion's a big deal. So you have that helping wind. It's kind of like hitting a downhill putt, right? Like it's gonna straighten things out. An uphill putt, if you get it offline, it's gonna make it worse. So your left-right dispersion is gonna be a lot bigger into the wind than it is downwind. So that's kind of fun to think about, but what would you do with that on the golf course? If you're downwind, you can aim a lot more aggressively. Or let's say you have a drivable par 4 tight, or maybe you're going for a par 5 green and 2 with a 3-wood.
Right.
You can play a lot more aggressively if there's trouble left and right, downwind, into the wind. Conversely, you're going to have to maybe step back your ego a little bit and play more conservatively on your aiming targets.
And that's mainly because the curve starts to get accentuated or reduced based on just that wind condition.
That cone's going to change a lot.
Yeah, okay. So ball fitting super important. What else would you mention about just getting fit for balls?
Yeah, I think a golf ball can have very different properties throughout all aspects of the game that are important to the golfer. You don't need to necessarily start with the short game or the driver or the irons. You can kind of fit the ball holistically to all match it to what you need in all parts of your game. So for example, a certain golf ball can fly high off the driver, medium off the irons, but be high spin around the greens. Right? You can have all these combinations and have different feel off the putter. So you can marry them to all those different aspects. And what's fun about golf ball is that you can fit it to your club fitting. So if you can't get your driver spin down enough, you can bring golf ball in and something that reduces your peak height, shallows that landing angle. But then maybe you wanted to do something slightly different on the irons. You can find a golf ball that kind of matches all those characteristics together.
Yeah, and one of the best parts of your that you're so brand agnostic to golf balls because you don't make them is I can ask you this next question, which is from year to year, you see these different brands from manufacturers and they say the same stamp on the ball, but are they always performing similarly from year to year, or do you see trends of just vast differences?
Yeah, we've seen some very big differences. I mean, specifically in greenside spin. We've seen balls change from being like low greenside spin one year to very high the next year, right? That would be a big area. Aerodynamically, we see balls that maybe would, spin. We measure them on the robot, and the initial spin is high off the driver, but they aerodynamically fly a little bit lower. So year to year, we see big differences in short game spin, and then also kind of aerodynamic properties. I think the ball designers and manufacturers are changing those things, so we got to keep up with them to help our golfers choose the right ball.
Yeah, so it's hard to find that information too. That's where a professional coach who does this stuff for a living is your best resource for sure, since you can't be inside of Marty's head to learn all that he has about Ballnamic. What else would you recommend for like an amateur player? They have to pick a ball. They can't use any type of software. They just don't have the ability to do that. Oftentimes I'll tell them the premium ball is probably just the go-to if you're serious about golf and you can't really pick. Do you feel like that's, am I saying that okay? Would you state that somewhat differently?
Yeah, no, I think in general that's a good rule of thumb, is that premium ball will be, generally speaking, something that has mid to low spin on a driver and that is high spin around the greens and that maintains spin in both wet and dry conditions. And so if your short game technique and your skill is to a level where you're going to leverage short game spin, and not every shot's going to be kind of a bump and run, and you want to maintain that spin whether it's dry conditions or you're out playing on a rainy day or dewy morning where there's water getting squeezed out of the grass, a premium ball in general is going to kind of maintain those properties.
Yeah. So that's okay for me to keep saying that? Seem about right?
I think it's generally accurate.
All right, and you know everything, so that's what I ask you. And then do you feel like there's anything else that you've learned that is maybe the most interesting part that's either something we haven't covered, or I get the general take from you that the initial launch conditions of a shot are important, but what happens when the ball hits its apex and starts coming down is very misunderstood and it's not talked enough. That's what your program really does.
Yeah.
But is that maybe the most interesting part of what Ballnamics revealed?
Yeah, I think Ballnamic, a couple things. One is that, the aerodynamics are a big deal. And for example, like from the ball that flies the highest to the lowest, if those all have the same initial conditions, you would need to reduce spin by 400 to get it to fly the lowest and increase the spin by 400 to get it to fly the highest. And that's just purely through the aerodynamic differences of balls.
Right.
So that's an 800 RPM spin window that if you're not factoring those aerodynamic properties, you're kind of blind to, so to speak, in evaluating golf ball performance. So I think that's number one. And then number two, the selection algorithms are modeled around how a tour player selects and kind of thinks about ball fitting.
Mm-hmm.
What do you need to do on the driver? Is kind of stability in the wind important? Do I want to reduce flyers? You can use the golf ball to reduce flyers. They have different hydrophobicity properties, just like our wedges. Phobicity.
Yeah, I got it. Spinsistency.
Spinsistency and hydrophobicity. When you
the
combine them,
version of
the magic really happens.
too. Yeah, right.
But that's how different balls can maintain more spin in wet conditions. And is that important to you as a golfer or not? Do you want to maximize spin around the greens, or is your technique such that you like to control it with launch and you're okay with a little bit more rollout?
Yep.
And being able to have that level of nuance in an educated golfer through that selection process is also pretty fun.
Okay, so let me sum this up. Stop me if I say something wrong. I do that a lot. Downwind, more aggressive line, higher launch, more spin.
Yep.
That's okay. Crosswind, don't try to curve the ball into it unless you're rock star PGA Tour star Corey Connors hitting shots into it. Into the wind, expect more dispersion, and the lower you can keep your peak height, the better, the more consistent you could potentially be. There's a lot of different parts in that one. Play a premium ball if you had to pick one. What else do you want to say? You tell them the end of this.
Aerodynamics matter, and balls change a lot year over year, so it's something that you want to work with your coach on, your teacher, to select the right golf ball, and maybe freeze it in for the year, play it, and then every year. It's something you should look at about every year.
Every year, okay. Good advice. You're a smart man. Thanks, man.